When we think of someone chosen for a special mission, a bright, confident, and determined figure may be the first image that comes to mind. It's natural for these qualities to be associated with the chosen, but this view can also create immense pressure on those who live this reality. After all, who hasn't felt imprisoned by the expectation of needing to be flawless in everything they do? And what about you? Have you ever noticed how the desire for perfection can become a burden along your journey? The truth is that this quest for the perfect does not manifest the same way for everyone. There is a type of perfectionism that is almost like a shadow, always lurking, disguising itself as dedication and commitment, but actually hiding doubt and fear. Let's explore some types of perfectionism that many chosen ones face, shedding light on these facets so that, by recognizing them, you may free yourself from this cycle of doubts and internal pressures. Let's delve into these types and identify which might be more present in your journey. 1. The classic perfectionist. When the ideal of perfection becomes an obstacle. For the classic perfectionist, the idea of being flawless in everything they do isn't just a desire, but a necessity. They deeply believe that they will only be accepted, respected, and worthy of their mission if everything they do meets a very high standard of quality. This expectation often doesn't come out of nowhere. In many cases, it's built over years through external influences, praise, recognition, and even the pressure of those around them who always expected the best from them. The classic perfectionist lives in a delicate balance between self-criticism and external acknowledgement, and this combination can become an almost impossible cycle of demands to sustain. Imagine the journey of a chosen one who, from a young age, was encouraged to be excellent. Perhaps during the early years of their life, they stood out at school or in sports. Teachers and family members always praised them for being the best, and these comments filled them with pride. However, over time, they began to realize that, to maintain this status, they would have to strive even harder. The excellence they achieved never seemed enough because, even after an accomplishment, a new goal would arise. Over the years, this internal pressure intensified. They could no longer just try or do their best. They needed to be perfect. Each mistake was a blow to their self-esteem, and any failure was seen as proof that they weren't as good as others believed. This type of chosen one develops an aversion to error. They begin to avoid situations where they might fail because the fear of being judged, or even judging themselves, becomes unbearable. A common example might be a work project. The classic perfectionist dedicates themselves intensely to every detail, revises numerous times, even losing sleep to ensure nothing goes wrong. Yet in the end, instead of feeling accomplished, they can only think about the small things that could have been better. To others, they appear extremely competent, dedicated, and meticulous, but inside, they feel they are never doing enough. Self-satisfaction eludes them, and the feeling of accomplishment is replaced by a subtle but constant frustration that haunts them. The pressure for perfection starts to spread to other areas of life. In their social life, they feel uncomfortable being vulnerable or sharing something they're not fully sure of. This chosen avoids discussing topics where they don't have absolute certainty because the fear of appearing uninformed or making a mistake makes them prefer silence. Even in personal relationships, they feel the need to be the perfect friend, the ideal partner, or the exemplary child, and any conflict or disagreement is seen as a personal failure. This expectation of excellence creates an emotional barrier because they feel they can't show who they really are, with all their flaws and imperfections. Instead of living lightly and spontaneously, they start to calculate every word, every gesture, to avoid any situation that might reveal a flaw or weakness. Over time, This constant pursuit of the flawless has a significant physical and emotional impact. The classic perfectionist may start to experience symptoms of anxiety, frequent fatigue, trouble sleeping, and in more severe cases, even depression. They find themselves trapped in a cycle where success is never enough, where each achievement is quickly overshadowed by the next goal to be reached. This type of chosen lives in a constant state of tension, always anticipating the next challenge and wondering how they can improve. They rarely manage to relax or appreciate the present moment, because their mind is always occupied with what still needs to be done. However, there are moments of clarity when the classic perfectionist starts to realize the weight of this demand. Maybe they've gone through a burnout episode, or perhaps someone close has told them they need to be kinder to themselves. In those moments, they begin to reflect on the reason for pursuing perfection and realize that this demand is more connected to the fear of being inadequate than to a genuine desire to do their best. This realization is painful because they realize they've spent a large part of their life trying to prove something they already knew deep down. Their worth is not only in what they do, but in who they are. This is the moment of transformation, where the classic perfectionist begins to walk a path of acceptance and self-compassion. They realize that being perfect is not synonymous with being complete, and that their journey as a chosen one doesn't need to be flawless to be meaningful. They start to understand that every mistake, every flaw, and every lesson is part of their growth as a human being. This process of acceptance is long and often painful, because it involves letting go of a belief they've carried for years. They need to learn to handle their own vulnerability and to accept that being flawed is, in fact, proof of their humanity. The change doesn't happen all at once. The classic perfectionist still feels the pressure, still pushes themselves, but slowly they begin to cultivate moments of self-compassion. Instead of focusing only on the outcome, they start to appreciate the effort and the journey. They allow themselves to celebrate small victories and learn that resting and self-care are also part of the mission of a chosen one. Over time, they realize that true excellence is not in being flawless, but in being authentic, in accepting themselves with all their flaws, and in continuing to learn, regardless of the mistakes that may come along the way. This transformation is liberating, because the classic perfectionist starts to allow themselves to live more freely and spontaneously. They open up to new experiences, take more risks, and learn that life is made of trials and adjustments. They understand that each imperfection is part of their story, and that by accepting their own limitations, they become stronger and more resilient. This chosen one discovers that perfection is not an end goal, but a state of acceptance and peace with oneself. They become capable of embracing the present, of appreciating each moment, and of realizing that in the end, true perfection is in simply being human. So, throughout their journey, the classic perfectionist discovers that the perfection they sought so much is not an external condition, but an internal acceptance. They begin to value the process and see the worth in each step, regardless of the results. 2. The soloist, carrying the weight of isolation and self-sufficiency. The soloist is the chosen one who sees independence as an absolute value. From an early age, they learn to trust only themselves and developed an almost insurmountable resistance to accepting help. For them, merit lies in facing challenges alone, without relying on anyone. This self-sufficiency, which they value and admire, often becomes a barrier that isolates them from others, an invisible armor that prevents them from experiencing the strength of collaboration and mutual support. The soloist firmly believes that asking for help is a sign of weakness, and worse still, a proof that they are not as capable as they would like to be. The soloist's story often begins with childhood experiences, where they learned that depending on others could lead to disappointment. Perhaps they went through situations where those they trusted weren't there when they needed them most, or maybe they were encouraged to be independent from a very early age. This chosen one became someone who doesn't want or cannot show vulnerability. Over the years, they perfected this ability to handle everything alone, to be their own support, and to avoid relying on other people. This stance is seen by them as a sign of strength and resilience, something that sets them apart and makes them special. They value this independence as an essential virtue and, for that reason, strive to keep this image of self-sufficiency intact. To understand the soloist better, imagine a chosen one who, even in the face of exhausting challenges, refuses to share their difficulties with others. In a work situation, for example, they may face an overload of tasks and stay up late to handle everything, but they would never ask a colleague for help or delegate part of their responsibilities. They believe that doing so would mean admitting that they can't handle the situation. And although this belief brings a heavy burden, it is something they carry with pride. However, over time, they begin to feel the impact of this emotional and physical isolation. The load they bear is intense, but they don't want anyone to notice. Their motto is that only the weak ask for support, and they refuse to see themselves that way. This self-imposed isolation not only affects their mental and physical health, but also disconnects them from valuable learning and growth opportunities. By rejecting support from others, the soloist loses the chance to see reality from different perspectives, to learn from the experiences and knowledge of others. They start to live in a world where only their own ideas, doubts, and challenges have space, which deeply limits them. They rarely allow themselves to open up to feedback and collaboration, as this would mean accepting that there may be weaknesses in their approach or that someone might contribute something they don't master. This attitude leads them to a state of loneliness. The soloist believes they must face everything alone, creating an invisible barrier between them and those around them. People notice they are not open to receiving help and naturally stop offering support. This reinforces the belief that they can only rely on themselves, thus strengthening the cycle. They start to feel even more isolated, and the more intensely they live this experience, the more they avoid showing any sign of vulnerability. The truth is that, over time, this loneliness consumes them, and they start to feel an emptiness that not even the most significant achievements can fill. Over time, the emotional and physical weight of carrying everything alone begins to take a heavy toll. The soloist becomes susceptible to exhaustion, both mentally and physically. The pressure of being solely responsible for all their battles wears them down, and they start to experience symptoms of anxiety and deep fatigue. However, even in these moments, they refuse to ask for help. They believe that admitting this need would be admitting failure, a weakness they are unwilling to face. This behavior leads them to a state of exhaustion, where activities that were once enjoyable become unbearable burdens. The soloist's transformation begins in a moment of vulnerability. Perhaps they reach their limit and realize that, without support, they won't be able to move forward. This moment can be a painful and revealing experience, where they finally understand that true strength doesn't lie in doing everything alone, but in recognizing when help is needed. This lesson is profound and often difficult to assimilate, because the soloist has built their identity around self-sufficiency. By admitting they need support, they feel as if they're betraying themselves. But at the same time, they realize that this vulnerability is a sign of courage. As they begin to open up to others' support, the soloist discovers a new form of strength. They realize that by sharing their struggles and challenges, They are allowing themselves to grow in ways that were once unimaginable. They learn that receiving help doesn't diminish their value, but enriches them, because they start to connect with those around them genuinely. This process of transformation is liberating, as they realize that the true value of their journey as a chosen one is not in doing everything alone, but in walking alongside those who support them. They start to view independence from a new perspective, not as an absolute necessity, but as a choice that can be balanced with collaboration and mutual support. This new path is full of learning, as the soloist discovers that by opening up to others, they expand their possibilities and experiences. They allow themselves to learn from the wisdom of others, and this exchange of knowledge and experiences enriches them in ways they never imagined. They realize that each person around them brings a unique perspective, an experience that complements their own, and by welcoming these contributions, they become a more complete chosen one, better prepared to face the challenges of their mission. The soloist's journey is a process of reconstruction. They need to unlearn the old belief that their strength lies in walking alone and start cultivating the idea that true strength is knowing when to ask for help. This learning transforms them, as they understand that by opening up to support, they are honoring their own vulnerability and creating more authentic and profound connections. They become an example of courage, not because they do everything alone, but because they had the courage to admit they needed others to reach their full potential. The soloist's journey teaches that mutual support is an act of trust and courage, and that by allowing themselves to be supported, they enable others to share in their strength and journey. This chosen one discovers that true independence is a choice, and that by balancing it with collaboration, they become stronger, more resilient, and more connected to their purpose. 3. The natural, the challenge of accepting that not everything comes easily. The natural is a type of chosen one who seems to possess an innate gift for learning and understanding things quickly. From a young age, they stood out for the ease with which they absorbed new knowledge and the speed with which they adapted to new situations. Over time, this skill became almost a trademark, something they are recognized for, and that they themselves deeply value. However, the talent they possess, instead of being a source of satisfaction, ends up becoming a trap. The natural begins to feel that they must be exceptional at everything they do, and that any sign of difficulty is, in fact, a threat to their own identity. For the natural, learning should always be simple and straightforward. They expect that any new task or knowledge will come as easily as their initial skills did. Thus, the idea that they might encounter difficulties, that they might need more time to understand or achieve something, causes enormous discomfort. They fear that any failure to learn quickly is a sign that perhaps they are not as capable as they always believed themselves to be. This fear leads them to avoid situations where immediate success is not guaranteed because they do not want to risk failing and losing their self-confidence. The natural's journey unfolds amidst nearly impossible expectations. They see themselves as someone who must always be ahead, who must master new concepts and skills with speed and precision. However, this expectation is a burden because they feel that with each new challenge, they are proving their worth. Imagine a natural chosen one who, upon starting a new project, encounters a series of unexpected difficulties. Instead of viewing these difficulties as a natural part of the learning process, they interpret them as proof of their own incompetence. They question whether they truly possess the talent they always believed they had, and begin to doubt their ability to carry out the task. This cycle of self-criticism and expectation has a profound impact on their confidence and worldview. The natural, who has always stood out for their ability to learn easily, begins to avoid situations that require practice, patience, and repetition. They prefer to stay in their comfort zone, engaging in activities where they know they will succeed, rather than venturing into something new that might challenge their skill. This behavior limits them because they stop exploring their true potential in the name of preserving the image of someone naturally talented. Over time, the natural begins to realize that by avoiding effort, they are limiting their own growth. They find themselves trapped in a cycle where their confidence depends solely on easy success, and this prevents them from experiencing the fullness of their journey as a chosen one. This cycle becomes unsustainable, and the natural begins to feel a void, a sense that something is missing in their life. They realize that although they have achieved many things, something essential is absent: the joy of learning and evolving through effort and dedication. The transformation of the natural begins when they accept that true learning comes from the process, not from the immediate result. This is a painful understanding because they have to confront their own identity and let go of the belief that it's only worth doing something if they can master it quickly. The natural begins to understand that each challenge carries an opportunity for growth, that each mistake is a step toward true mastery. They realize that the value of their mission as a chosen one is not in doing everything effortlessly, but in allowing themselves to grow through continuous effort. This learning leads them to embrace imperfection and accept that the path to excellence is paved with trials, errors, and restarts. They begin to seek activities that require more dedication, more practice, and they allow themselves to make mistakes without judging themselves so harshly. With each new challenge, the natural remembers that true growth is not in the speed with which they learn, but in the depth with which they experience each moment. This process of self-discovery frees them because they realize that their worth as a chosen one is not in being naturally talented, but in being resilient, in accepting their own limits, and in striving to overcome them continuously and consciously. Throughout this journey of transformation, the natural rediscovers the beauty of learning. They begin to appreciate each step, each small achievement, and understand that effort and repetition are essential parts of development. They discover that true fulfillment comes from practice, persistence, and the humility to recognize that there is always something new to learn. This chosen one becomes an example of courage and authenticity, for their strength no longer lies in ease, but in the dedication with which they embrace each stage of their path. This change in perspective is a true liberation for the natural. They realize that by accepting the process, they become stronger, more complete, and more prepared for the challenges that arise. The natural learns that the value of their journey is in the depth with which they live each experience, and that talent alone does not define their worth. By accepting their own humanity, they find peace and satisfaction in simply being who they are, without the need to prove anything to anyone. The Superwoman or Superman. When being strong in everything becomes a trap. The Superwoman or Superman is the chosen one who feels they need to be everything for everyone at all times. This type of chosen is driven by an intense need to fulfill all the roles assigned to them, whether at work, in the family, among friends, or even in daily activities. They believe they must excel in each of these roles, as if they have to carry the expectations and demands of everyone around them. For them, it's not enough to do their best. They need to be flawless and tireless because they believe it is their responsibility to keep everything functioning. However, this stance leads them to almost unbearable exhaustion because they rarely allow themselves to rest or admit their own limitations. The journey of this chosen one is marked by a cycle of self-sufficiency, where they refuse to show any sign of vulnerability or need for help. From a young age, they saw themselves as someone who always needed to be available for others, whether to solve problems, listen to others' issues, or offer solutions. They developed an identity based on the idea that their strength lies in never failing and always managing everything, regardless of the circumstances. This belief, as noble as it may seem, becomes a trap because they begin to ignore their own limits to maintain the image of endurance and resilience. Imagine the story of a chosen one who, from a young age, was praised for their ability to take care of everyone around them. At school, they were the one who volunteered to help classmates, who was always willing to do a little more. At home, they took on responsibilities that perhaps weren't even theirs, always aiming to ease others' burdens. Over the years, this chosen one came to believe that their worth lay in their ability to support everyone, and that if they showed tiredness or asked for help, they would be disappointing the people who depend on them. This belief becomes a powerful motivation, but also a source of anguish because, behind this facade of strength, lies a fragility they do not allow themselves to show. As they grow and take on more responsibilities, the superwoman or superman finds themselves increasingly overwhelmed. At work, they are the type who accepts all tasks, volunteers to solve problems that are not even their responsibility, and often sacrifices their own time to ensure everything is perfect. In their personal life, they feel responsible for taking care of family members, friends, and even acquaintances, as if they have to be the emotional and physical support for everyone. This chosen one rarely says no, and even when they are exhausted, they force themselves to continue because they believe that others depend on them, and that by stopping, they would be failing everyone who needs their support. 5. The specialist. The weight of knowing everything and the anxiety of not being enough. The specialist is the chosen one who feels an almost uncontrollable need to master every aspect of their mission. For them, knowledge and competence are essential virtues, and they have built their identity around the idea that knowing everything is fundamental to fulfilling their purpose. This type of chosen one believes that any gap in their knowledge is a threat to their reputation and their inner security. They feel that to be respected and trustworthy, they must have answers to all questions and be prepared for any situation that arises. However, this relentless pursuit of knowledge and technical perfection leads them to a life of anxiety, comparison, and constant dissatisfaction. The specialist's story often begins with a pivotal experience, where they realized that being the know-it-all brought them approval and recognition. It may have been a situation where they were praised for their intelligence or the depth with which they understood a specific topic. From that moment, they began to associate their worth with the amount of knowledge they possessed. However, as the years passed, this behavioral pattern intensified, and they started to feel that they always needed to learn more, know more, and be more. The sense of security that knowledge brought them transformed into an almost obsessive need to stay ahead, to master every detail, so as not to be seen as someone who doesn't know enough. However, this pursuit of absolute knowledge is a heavy burden. The specialist feels they can never relax, that there is always something more to study, to understand, and to master. Imagine a chosen one who, while preparing for a meeting, feels extremely uncomfortable upon realizing there is one point they haven't fully mastered. Rather than allowing themselves to learn during the process or trusting that they can seek information as needed, they plunge into a marathon of study, sleepless nights, and exhausting efforts to ensure there will be no gaps in their understanding. However, when the meeting ends, instead of feeling relieved or satisfied, they immediately start worrying about the next challenge, where once again, they'll feel the need to be the most prepared. This constant anxiety has deep effects on their emotional health. The specialist lives in a state of alert, fearful that someone might notice a flaw in their knowledge or perceive them as someone who isn't fully competent. They start to isolate themselves emotionally, avoiding situations where they might be questioned or where they don't have complete mastery of the topic. This isolation disconnects them from those around them because they feel incapable of showing vulnerability or admitting that at times they don't have the answer. In their world, not knowing is a severe flaw, a direct threat to their identity. The impact of this behavior goes beyond mental exhaustion. The specialist begins to develop a sense of inadequacy, a feeling that, no matter how much they learn, it will never be enough. This constant comparison with others, especially with those who have more experience in certain areas, fuels a cycle of self-criticism and pressure. They feel there is always someone better prepared, which drives them to seek even more knowledge in an attempt to fill a void that never seems to be filled. This cycle of never knowing enough becomes a prison where learning, which should be a source of joy and growth, turns into a source of anxiety and burnout. The turning point for the specialist often comes at a moment of exhaustion, where they realize that their desire to know everything is, in fact, limiting their ability to live fully and authentically. They come to understand that technical knowledge, while important, is not the only thing that defines their value as a chosen one. This is a crucial moment where they begin to see that they are human and that vulnerability is an essential part of their journey. Admitting that they don't know everything does not diminish their value. Instead, it makes them more approachable, closer to others, and more capable of learning from their own experiences. The transformation of the specialist is deep and liberating. They learn to embrace not knowing as an opportunity for growth rather than a failure. This learning doesn't happen overnight. It is a process of letting go and acceptance that requires patience and self-compassion. The specialist begins to allow themselves to make mistakes, to experiment, and to realize that true learning comes from the process, from attempts and new beginnings. They understand that the quest for knowledge is infinite, and that their value is not in mastering everything, but in sharing what they know and being open to others' contributions. Therefore, my friends, the specialist, the superwoman or superman, the natural, the soloist, and the classic perfectionist, each of these chosen ones follows a unique journey of self-discovery, confronting their own fears, limitations, and beliefs. In their respective journeys, they discover that the true purpose is not to achieve an unattainable ideal of perfection, but to accept their own humanity, live authentically, and transform their weaknesses into strengths. These chosen ones teach us that the mission is not about the absence of flaws, but about the ability to overcome, to learn, and to move forward with courage, accepting the complexity and beauty of being human. This understanding shows us that, in some way, we all possess a bit of each of these profiles. Each chosen one, by accepting and respecting their imperfections, reflects a journey that many can recognize and share. They remind us that the true essence of a chosen one is in accepting and loving oneself, and that it is in the acceptance of our weaknesses that we find the strength to fulfill our purpose with dignity and truth.